What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It's the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith, please turn to us when you've got that question that's really bothering you. You just want to know, what does the Catholic Church teach about this, or this? Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Outside North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Those of you watching on TV today, you can participate as well. Here's our email address for you folks, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Pedro Quiles is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing great. How are you, sir?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
Interesting question here from Tom, who says, there is no way anyone could read The True Devotion to Mary by Louis de Montfort and not claim it is worship. I wish Catholics would just admit that they are fully devoted to Mary on the same level as Jesus and then deal with the fallout. It is disingenuous to claim it is not really worship because there are no sacrifices involved or that it's just poetic love language. It is pure and simple worship of a human being in the same level as Christ. And for me, that is intolerable. And again, that's from Tom.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I really appreciate a lot about this question. Let's start with the, I'm going to take one line out of context here.
Sure.
I wish that Catholics would just get on with it and admit that they're fully devoted to Mary. Guilty as charged. Absolutely fully devoted to Mary. Totally, right? However, I'm also fully devoted to my wife.
Good.
I'm fully devoted to my children.
Good point.
In the proper context, I'm even fully devoted to my golden retriever. Like, he's got a friend in me, let me tell you, you know? And so the nature of that devotion, the quality of that devotion, the end goal of that devotion is different in each case. So in being fully devoted to my wife, for example, I'm totally committed to her happiness. And I really want to do whatever I can to protect her from harm, to further her interests, to facilitate her growth in holiness and virtue and strength and health and all those kinds of things. So basically to look to her flourishing as I would look to my own. You know, Aristotle said a friend is a second self. That's eminently true of marriage, right? Where we really do become one flesh and my interests become hers and vice versa. Now, in being devoted to God, the language is merely analogous. If I say I'm devoted to my wife and I'm devoted to my God, obviously they can't be in the same way because God has no interests I could further. He doesn't need my protection. He's already fully blessed in himself. I'm not going to be able to further his flourishing, right? Nor can I ever enter into the heart of God in the way that I could enter into the heart of my wife, in that it is within my power to understand the interior of my wife's life. I could really know her inner world as she reveals it to me, and fairly comprehensively, and with a lot of equality because we're both human beings. And the Catholic dogma is I can never know God that way. I can never know the essence of God. God's essence is hidden from me, right? In the beatific vision, I'll have an image of it, but not in this life. And so, you know, to talk about loving God really means that I love what God loves, right? And I want to be in union with the good that God is, but I can't look out for his interests, so to speak. And when I talk about a devotion to a friend in virtue, it's like, well, here's an analogy. It's like when we're both, say you're both devoted to tennis, right? Okay. And like what binds you together is you have this common interest that you're both pursuing where you're on the same plane, right? But when you're devoted to God with a friend, like you're both trying to be in harmony with the good that's the same good, and therefore you begin to kind of resonate together, right? And your friendship takes on a kind of higher pitch. The overtones of holiness begin to redound throughout the levels of the relationship as you're both oriented towards the same concrete good. And that's what, for a Catholic, that's what devotion to Mary is like, right? It's more like that, trying to come to resonate with her perspective as she is in a deeper union with God than I am. But I certainly can't love her as I love God, right? Because she isn't the good, right? God is the good in itself, greater than which there is none. That's not Mary, but she is a human being who happens to be resonant with that good to a supereminent degree. And so just like if I wanted to, say, learn how to play the piano really well, I would do well to associate with an expert pianist. If I want to grow in holiness and the love of God, I do well to associate with someone who is an expert in that domain. Okay?
Yep.
Now, in spite of your rejection of my caveat about poetic language, I think that's absolutely on point. Absolutely on point. And understanding context is essential for grasping theological language, especially about the Blessed Virgin Mary. I personally don't like Louis de Montfort, and I don't read him, right? Because I do think that he is subject to the kind of misinterpretation that Protestants like yourself are wont to bring to him. I understand he's not a doctor of the Church. He is a saint, and it's an allowable devotion. But Catholics are not obligated to de Montfortian spirituality. I myself am not a de Montfortian. But I understand something about his social context. And de Montfort was an 18th century French prelate, cleric, who lived at a time when the church in France was racked with the Jansenist controversy. And you have to read him against that social and theological context, which was an era of moral rigorism that was heretical. And he had a devotional rather than an intellectual response to it that took the form of his true devotion to Mary, but taken out of the 18th century French Catholic context is quite easily misunderstood and misappropriated, which is why I don't typically give Protestant converts de Montfort's works like day one when they enter the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
If they happen upon them and that resonates with their spiritual life, then that's fine. But there are lots of other ways to be devoted to Mary. And the language about sacrifice is also absolutely on point, because I'm not to sacrifice is to give of myself in pursuit of this higher goal. Well, there's no higher goal than God, and I don't sacrifice to the Blessed Virgin Mary in that way. Like I said, I'm trying to be sort of resonant with her own union with God.
Tom, thanks so much for your email. We'll be back in just a moment with lots more Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. It's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. Calls coming in right now, 833-288-3986. Michael McCall handling our social media today. If you would like to ask a question via YouTube, because we're streaming there right now, just put your question in the comments box. Hey, do you get emails? Well, you probably do. Everybody does, I think. And one of the great ones to get is Wings. It is the EWTN weekly e-newsletter where you can find out about EWTN radio programs, TV programs, items from our EWTN religious catalog, so much more, even items from the news. Sign up for Wings at EWTN.com. Click on the word subscribe, EWTN.com, and then click on subscribe. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN, beginning with Al in one of my favorite cities, Panama City, Florida, listening on the great Guadalupe radio. Hey there, Al. What's on your mind today, sir?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I hope you're having a blessed day.
We are. What's on your mind today, Al?
Well, our son got married Saturday, and as we were at the ceremony, the Genesis and Matthew verses about the man and the woman leaving their parents and becoming one, a little rust fell off the gears in my brain. I started thinking about how the rib was taken from Adam. And then as I was praying the rosary today with the Annunciation, I was thinking about the Immaculate Conception, Jesus being within the lines of David, and Mary and Jesus being the new Adam and Eve, Ark of the Covenant. And I was thinking, would the Holy Spirit have taken the seat from Joseph to perform the Immaculate Conception, to maintain the line of David, or am I thinking way off? course here.
Okay, thanks. So just one point of vocabulary clarification. The Immaculate Conception does not refer to the conception of Jesus. The Immaculate Conception refers to the conception of Mary, right? The virginal conception is what we're talking about, Jesus' conception in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So that's what you're talking about. Could the Holy Spirit have taken the haploid gamete from Joseph's genetic material to combine with Mary's in a virginal conception to give birth to the God-man Jesus? So obviously, the Catholic dogma on Mary's perpetual virginity does not address this question. And so it is for us, as today we will put on the hat of speculative theologians, all right? We're not actually on a radio show or a television show. We are holed away somewhere in an ivory tower seminar just talking with 3 or 4 theologian grad students, whose language is taken with a grain of salt, and they can do no harm because nobody reads doctoral dissertations, okay? So let's pretend we're in that rarefied environment, and we're just trying this on hypothetically. And so you float that idea. And since my job as a seminar director is to argue with you, I will argue with you, but keeping in mind that neither one of us has any clue what we're talking about, because the dogma doesn't answer the question. It's an unanswered question. How did the virginal conception take place? Don't know. It was a miracle. But now let's play with your idea with all those caveats. I'm against it. And this is my intuition. There's no doctrine here. This is just my intuition. I'll tell you why I'm against it. So there are at least 2 rationales for there having been a virginal conception. One is just the fact of Mary's perpetual virginity. Because, Eve was the mother of the human race. Mary is the mother of all those redeemed in Christ. And so her maternity, being a spiritual maternity, is iconically figured better. It's represented better by a virginal conception, because in giving birth to the God-man, she gives birth to the church that is his body. And so the icon of Mary's perpetual virginity, what I mean by that is the doctrine becomes for us a kind of luminescent sign of Mary's spiritual condition, her purity, and the rebirth that the church desires, which is a spiritual, not a natural birth. Nicodemus said, how can a man enter a second time in his mother's womb? And Jesus' response was, you dodo, he doesn't. We're not talking about that kind of birth. And so singling out the virginal conception is a way of sort of prefiguring that in salvation history. But there is another argument for the virginal conception, and it's hinted at in Luke's genealogy. Adam's genealogy takes Jesus back to Abraham or through David. Luke's genealogy takes him back through Adam and says, and therefore Adam was the son of God, and therefore Christ is the son of God, right? And so it connects the Christ's conception, the matter of his conception, to his divine vocation, not just to Mary's divine maternity. And since Christ is the second Adam, and the Incarnation, as it were, sort of rebooting the human race in Jesus, to me, the parallelism between Adam works better if there's some kind of spontaneous act of creation on God's part. So yes, he takes the chromosomes from Mary's DNA so that Christ is fully human. Mm-hmm. But this would be my speculation. But there's some kind of special act of creation to make up the missing haploid, so you have the complete gamete, right? Uh-huh. So that Christ is kind of, he's in the same position to God, as Adam. Like Adam is an act of special creation, from dirt, mm-hmm. and that there's something like that parallel in Christ's birth, so that he is really the new Adam. Now, again, like I said, neither one of us has any idea what we're talking about, and the ecclesiastical censors may just sink both of us for these speculations, right? But that's where my intuition is.
Okay, Al, is that helpful for you, sir?
That is, and I knew the Immaculate Conception with Mary. My brain got, once again, the rust up there. I thank you, and God bless you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I know a little about that rust.
Oh, I do too, man.
Rust never sleeps.
That's right.
Neil Young, he was right on top of it. Al, thanks so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's called to communion here on EWTN with Dr. David Anders. Here's an email we received from Thomas. Does the Catholic Church believe in the replacement theology? I have seen arguments both yes and no. The reason I ask is that I'm a convert to Catholicism, and I have that one old friend who is a Baptist. That is one of the many points he uses to tell me how bad was my decision. Thanks, Thomas.
So when I hear replacement theology, what I think of is the doctrine that the church has replaced Israel. And I don't know if you have something else in mind other than that. If that's what you have in mind, let's speak to that issue. If that's not it, write us back and tell me I got it wrong. So the church's position is a bit nuanced. Obviously, the New Testament position, the Catholic position, is that the Catholic Church founded by Jesus is in continuity with the Abrahamic promise, right? That God promised Abraham that he'd be the father of many nations. Mm-hmm. And Paul teaches quite clearly that the Gentiles, that's us, become members of Abraham and Israel through faith. And so that we are co-heirs with Israel of the promise. Now, what Paul didn't anticipate, but what happened, is that we ended up with a predominantly Gentile church. And, Paul's beginning to see this in the book of Romans. And he says, well, what about my countrymen that have rejected the Messiah? Does that mean that God's promise to ethnic Israel, to biological, genetic Israel is null and void? And Paul's his initial response is no, because, hey, there's me. I'm Jewish, and so are the other, 11, the 12 now that we got Matthias. And there's a Jewish church here in the first century when I'm writing my epistles. So at that level, no, he was still faithful to the remnant. But then Paul goes on to say, but all Israel will be saved. And he seems to be indicating there, not just, Israel in quotes as in the Gentile converts, mm-hmm. but that ethnic Israel, that the physical progeny of Abraham are somehow included. But it's, the depths of the mystery of God. Like, how's that going to shake out? I, Paul, don't know. And the present position of the Catholic Church is that ethnic Israel, if you will, the Jewish people who don't acknowledge Christ as the Messiah, have not been forgotten or abandoned by God, and that the covenants and the promises to Abraham still hold, and that they are somehow within the providential plan of God. But to be honest with you, figuring out how that shakes out temporally in salvation history, that's beyond our pay grade. So, we continue to proclaim the full truth about Jesus. We obviously think that the Christian interpretation of the Old Testament is the appropriate one, culminating in the New Testament and the kingdom of God inaugurated by Jesus. And so we definitely have some disagreements with the rabbis and the way they read the text, and particularly the way they read Christ. But neither do we write them off. And so we value and respect their position, see them as elder brothers in the Lord, and trust that, God's going to shake out the details over time.
Thomas, we thank you so much for your email. And if you would like to send us an email for a future show, especially those of you watching on TV today, here's our address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. All right, back to the phones now at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Paul in Iowa, listening on the great Iowa Catholic Radio. Hello, Paul. What's on your mind today, sir?
Well, thank you both for your mission and ministry. Appreciate it very much. It's been very helpful listening to your program. And basically, I just wondered if kind of mirroring Dr. Andrews, his life as far as his spiritual journey, the call to marriage, after college and that. And I'm a widower now. And I met my wife after I was in minor seminary and went to the Marine Corps, and then would eventually retire recently here. And she passed in April, and that's about the time I retired. And there's been this call to always get back to the priesthood, maybe afforded a second chance, I guess, if you want to call it that. And so I just was going to ask Dr. Andrews, I do have a spiritual advisor, but our diocese not necessarily keen on elder or older priests, right? So, and I turned 60, and so I've looked at something like Hales Corners in Wisconsin and that, and I guess there's that call, but there's always that need to do more. And my wife suffered for about 3 decades of painful existence through pain and her body just kind of gave out, or she had multiple organ failure. And the question I had is, I always feel I don't do enough, and I didn't know if he had, some words of wisdom or from his own experience of, just like he said earlier here, is that God is all good. Well, do we do enough, and when is there enough? And I just don't feel I've reached that point yet.
Okay.
And
all right.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the question. So the question of how to serve is a wonderful one. I mean, that's a beautiful question to ask yourself. Obviously, I don't know you or your specific situation, so I can't tell you what your vocation is. I think it's fantastic that you're exploring the priesthood, and I've known people who have been ordained to the priesthood as older priests, and every diocese has a different age limit. Mm-hmm. And I think my own diocese changed. Like at one time, we took much older vocations, and then I think we dialed it back. But there's a retired priest now. He retired a year or two ago, who became a priest. I think he was pushing 70, right? Maybe even 70 when he got ordained, and his wife had died. And he'd been a NASA scientist before that. And he had basically one parish in his career and served for, I don't know, maybe a decade. But a decade's pretty darn good.
Sure it is.
And so I've known cases like that, and I think my diocese you'd have aged out, but there are others that are a possibility. Now, you raised one. You said something that was kind of interesting to me. You talked about your service in the Marine Corps. Were you a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps?
I wasn't. I was enlisted, and then took a break. Was going to be an officer, and then I got hurt as a police officer in the line of duty, and then I got back in our local Air National Guard here and retired from that full time. And
okay, because the reason I was asking is I know the archdiocese, the military archdiocese, will allow older vocations if you were. I think if you were a commissioned officer before the age of 42, but with your own situation, I don't know. It might be something to take up with their vocations office. But I would explore dioceses and find out which diocese would accept a seminarian at your age, and then just begin the process of inquiry. And you may find that, hey, if every door is closed in your face, well, then there's your answer. The doors are closed, and you could maybe look into the permanent diaconate or some other form of ministry. But with your background and experience, it seems to me that St. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians, and he says that everybody has a different gift. Some people serve by teaching, some by helping, some by administration. There are as many giftings as there are personalities, and it doesn't have to be ordained ministry, to which you give yourself. I have a friend who is he's a single man, was married. That situation changed, and he's a retired attorney who retired from law practice at a fairly young age, and what he does is coach soccer with inner city kids and try to get involved in their lives and help fatherless children.
Wow!
And it's a beautiful ministry. It doesn't require the ordained state, but he's a servant-hearted guy, and there's 1,000 ways like that you can serve. Your background in law enforcement and the military, I know, has lots of applications. And I don't know what your particular skill set is, but I know that you've got one, and it's probably extraordinary. And I would love to get to know you and know what those skills are. And I bet I could use some of them, So there's some place for you. And the way forward is discernment, discernment, discernment. And that's take counsel, take counsel, take counsel.
And Paul, by the way, since we don't want to forget about this, we are very sorry for your loss. Thank you so much for your call today. In a moment, we'll be talking with Ed in North Central Iowa, also John in New Orleans, and Justin has a question. We'll also get to a couple of emails. 2 lines open at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 for Call to Communion. Stay with us. Glad you're with us for Call to Communion here on EWTN with Dr. David Anders. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. Just a couple lines open here, 833-288-3986. Back to it with Ed in North Central Iowa, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Ed, what's on your mind today, sir? Ed in north central Iowa. Are you there?
I am, sorry.
That's okay. Go right ahead.
Well, gentlemen, I won't keep you too long. I just love your program. My wife and I listen all the time, and we frequently leverage your responses and your insight, Dr. Anders, in our OCIA classes and in conversations with our adult children and grandchildren. So just thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Calling to thanks. I'm calling to comment, I guess, on your great response to Al's question earlier about the whole DNA and all of that of Jesus's conception, virginal conception, and I guess I've never really thought of it too much either. Your PhD is in your area, mine is in molecular genetics, and your great response just triggered a plausible. God can do anything, and he might have just made it happen the way it happened. But you talked very, very elegantly actually about the whole. Mary's haploid gametes and all of that. There is a process, so I'm a plant scientist. I don't work in the mammalian area, but there is a process that occurs naturally and it occurs in the laboratory that we call doubled haploids. And it's a way of plants responding to extreme environmental conditions or us creating genetically pure stock for breeding crops and that sort of thing. And God can do anything the way he wants. Maybe part of the answer is that in order for Jesus' 100% humanity and 100% divinity, he just doubled the haploid state of Mary's gamete, and that was good enough. So I just thought that was a very insightful answer and probably more scientifically sound than you might have realized.
Wow.
Well, I tell you, nothing like a good perusal of Wikipedia before you answer a question to make you sound like you know what you're talking about. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I didn't know about the double haploid effect in plant genetics, but I'll keep that one in my back pocket and pull it out and sound even smarter the next time we get a question about Mary's DNA. So appreciate that.
Not sure if you could sound any smarter. I'm not sure about that.
I can sound more scientifically credible. How about that?
I'll go with that. Ed, thanks so much for your kind words. Appreciate that. Let's go to John, a first-time caller from New Orleans, listening on the great Catholic community media, the almighty 690. Hey there, John. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hi. I have some cousins who fell away from the Catholic Church, and they have countless claims on why, but one reason is the Constantine situation. They say Constantine hijacked true Christianity, and he's the father of Roman Catholicism, and that's one of their claims why Roman Catholicism is a false way to worship Jesus or whatever. And I just want to hear maybe Dr. Anders' take on that.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So there are a number of problems with the Constantine hijacked the Catholic Church hypothesis. And so let's just look at the historical facts. What was Constantine's major involvement in Catholic history? Well, it was that he helped orchestrate the organization of the First Council of Nicaea, which defined the dogma of the Blessed Trinity. And why did Constantine do that? Well, the reason Constantine got involved in church politics was because the Arian controversy was politically significant. It had split the empire, over this question, and there were definite geographic centers of power in the issue. And Constantine was interested in the question of unity. And Constantine also we have some writings from Constantine. And if you read his theological writings, they're very naive. His grasp of the Christian faith was pretty impoverished. And he really sounds like a kind of, ancient Oriental potentate who has a kind of, archaic view of divinity, where as long as you get divine worship right, then, your crops will grow and you'll be victorious in battle. And so it's really at that level that he's interested. He doesn't want to offend the gods or the God, as the case may be. And he this whole splitting up the church business can't be good for business, politically or supernaturally. And he just wants to get it settled. But he doesn't write or talk like someone who has sort of a deep theological understanding of what he's doing. And as the Arians and the Homoousians, the Orthodox party, began to debate the issues, to Constantine it sounded like a theological gobbledygook. And if you've ever listened to two abstract theologians go at it over an abstruse topic, you can maybe share some of Constantine's befuddlement. And he's like, what the heck difference does it make, guys? One essence, similar essence, two essences. How many cares how many essences? Let's just agree on something and move forward. That's really his level of interest. It's let's get this thing politically settled. Let's get some unity in the church. And then, the gods will smile on us and we'll have a profitable empire. So let's get to work, right? That's really it. He wasn't even a Catholic at the time. He was a catechumen. He wasn't a baptized Catholic. And so when he wanted to get the job done, and he said, we need to get this unity thing fixed, what did he do? Who did he assemble? The bishops of the Catholic Church.
Yep.
So the people that actually wrote the document and promulgated it, and the ones that made the theological judgments, were Catholic bishops. Where do you think those guys came from? Did they just grow out of mango trees? No, actually, they had been in place. There had been a Catholic hierarchy operating with apostolic succession for 300 years. 300 years there was a Catholic Church. There is a well-documented, recorded history of Catholic priesthood, Catholic episcopacy, Catholic magisterial action, Catholic tradition, Catholic liturgy, Catholic doctrine, Catholic evangelization, Catholic social work. The entire institutional framework of Catholicism is well established for Constantine to have people to assemble in the name of the Catholic Church. He appeals to the existing Catholic Church to put its house in order and solve the political problem for him. And that's exactly what he did. And what did the Catholic Church do at the Council of Nicaea? To what did they appeal? They appealed to their own sacred history, to their own tradition, to their own authorities, to their own scriptures. Not to Constantine. But they appealed to the institutions and the resources and the authorities of the Catholic Church, right? So everything about the council, its functioning, its theological basis of authority, its decision-making predate Constantine's involvement. The champion of orthodoxy at the council, Athanasius, wrote his famous magnum opus on the De Incarnatione, on the Incarnation, which defends the divinity of Christ, before the council. Right? The reason there was a controversy is that Athanasius and the Athanasian party were defending orthodoxy against the Arian political party. And Constantine woke up and noticed it. Well, the Athanasian party won. They were the ones that were declared orthodox. Constantine didn't write that position. It wasn't even his favored position. Constantine seems to have maybe favored the Arian position. And his heirs definitely did. Subsequent emperors were Arians and semi-Arians. And the Catholic Church had to continually fight off the empire, which wanted to push them to temporize the Orthodox position. So there's just nothing in the actual history to support that thesis. Constantine was important as an historical figure, and in every era. You said I think your relatives, did they become Baptists or something? There's some kind of Protestant. You think American politics don't affect the discourse in their Protestant church? Of course they do.
Sure.
The culture, you think the internet, the social media, Netflix, television, this doesn't affect theological discourse in our country? Of course it does. Every country is affected by its internal history and culture as it goes about doing the work of theology. The 4th century is no different.
Yeah.
But, that to claim that Constantine began the Catholic Church would be as absurd as to say that, the modern Democrat or Republican Party began the Baptist Church, because there are Democrats or Republicans who function as Baptists, and their politics comes into their religious expression. It's just a ridiculous thesis.
John, thanks so much for your call. Hope that's helpful for you. And it's Called to Communion here on EWTN. Going now to Rob in Grand Rapids, Michigan, listening on the great Holy Family Radio. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today, sir?
I appreciate taking my call. I've been trying to wrap my mind around the Catholic view of works and faith in being saved. And I guess I just don't know, do you have to have works to be saved, or do you have to do works to be saved?
Okay, very simple. I'll make it really simple for you. You can be lying comatose, unconscious, near death, and receive saving grace as a Catholic, literally never regain consciousness, die and go to heaven. You literally don't even have to be conscious to receive saving grace in the Catholic Church. And I can get into the mechanics of how that particular case would work later on. But let me make my point. For a Catholic, the whole works issue, many Protestants mischaracterize it this way. They think, well, you Catholics think, you've got this laundry list, and you've got to go down and check all the items on the laundry list. And if you don't have enough check marks, if you don't have enough discrete good works, well, then you're not saved. That is not the Catholic position at all, at all, at all. Another illustration, we think that a baby who gets baptized is saved. He's never done anything. He can't even say his name, right? He just, that's all he's got going on, right? And he's saved through grace and through faith without ever having lifted a finger to do anything good or bad. How does that work? What's the mechanism for that for a Catholic? Well, what the Catholic thinks is that when God's grace comes into your heart, that your character is changed. You may never have an opportunity to act on that character, but your character is changed, and you are now oriented to the love of God and neighbor. Like intrinsically, your character is now to love God and neighbor. Imagine, like, as an analogy, I've talked about this on the show before for crazy reasons. Some people genetically can't like cilantro. Other people genetically love cilantro. Like, you either love cilantro or you hate it, right? And there's nothing you can do about it because it's genetic. Imagine if you'd never tasted cilantro and you were born without the cilantro-loving gene. And then God miraculously comes in and goes whammo and changes your genes so that now you have the capacity to love cilantro, though you've never actually eaten cilantro, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of an analogy. Like, let's say you've never had an opportunity to actually perform a good work. Mm-hmm. But God changes you so that you now have that capacity. You're now oriented to the love of God and neighbor. And you're saved in virtue of that. Council of Trent was very, very clear. This is section 6, chapter 16, that the grace that you receive in the sacraments is sufficient to affect your having merited eternal life from the moment of the reception of the grace, regardless of what follows subsequently in your concrete behaviors. Right? Now, that doesn't make concrete behavior unimportant, and it is in lots of ways. But in terms of the actual moment of salvation, it comes with the infusion of grace. How is that different from the Protestant point of view? The Catholic position is that you're saved because God changes your character. The Protestant position is you're saved because God imputes Christ's righteousness to you, so that your character remains, well, if not unaffected, it still remains corrupted to a significant extent, so that the sinner never intrinsically merits salvation. He's just saved as a sheer act of God's benevolence, right, but for Jesus' sake. But he himself remains kind of a desperate sinner. And then obviously those two positions cash out existentially very, very differently in the way you live your life. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the moment of salvation, it's just an internal change of God pouring his love into your heart. That's what saves you as a Catholic, which then, of course, will necessarily involve good works down the road. But it's not the laundry list that saves you. It's the change of heart that saves you.
Rob, we hope that's helpful. Thanks so much for your call from Grand Rapids today. Call to Communion here on EWTN, one of our great programs, of course, Women of Grace with Johnnette Williams. And a subset of that program is what we call Wacky Wednesday. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, this is when Johnnette welcomes New Age researcher and blogger Sue Brinkman to the program, and they talk about some of the wacky things that distract from the faith. I'll just lay one out for you. Ouija boards, do you really want to fool with those? I don't think so. Check it out Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern, only on EWTN Radio. Back to the phones for Adam in Minnesota, listening online, EWTN.com. Adam, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, I was just wondering if at any point in the very early church were priests ordaining priests without an established bishop, like before the episcopate was officially established, and if so, when did that change? And if that was the case, would Luther have been able to validly ordain priests if he wasn't in schism? I grew up Lutheran, and my family had this question in my conversations with them, and I was just trying to figure out how to accurately respond.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic position is that the Sacrament of Holy Orders comes in certain gradations, and you can get the full package, 2/3 of the package, or 1/3 of the package. The full package is episcopacy. Bishops have the fullness of the priesthood, and they're called the third grade of holy orders. They can do everything that a priest can do, plus they have ecclesiastical jurisdiction that includes the jurisdiction to ordain others. Okay, priests have the faculty, can receive the faculty to lawfully celebrate the sacraments, and they can efficaciously always consecrate the Eucharist, whether they have faculties or not. They may not do so lawfully. And deacons can't consecrate the Eucharist or hear confessions or ordain others, but they have faculties to preach and to celebrate some of the sacraments like baptism and marriage, and they're ordained to the service of the church and the people of God. And so when Christ ordained the apostles, he ordained them with the fullness of the priesthood and the third grade of holy orders. So they were simultaneously bishops and priests. In terms of whether a mere priest can ordain someone else, well, if a priest attempted that today, it would definitely not be valid, right? Because he wouldn't have faculties to do that. The trying to get down into the metaphysics of why that is the case is a more controversial question. And like all of the sacraments, the Catholic Church's understanding of the way the sacrament of holy orders works evolved over time. It developed over time. And so you can find earlier periods of the Church's history where that question seems to be ambiguously answered, right, as to whether it is merely a matter of the faculties to validly perform the sacrament rather than the kind of the essential, the ontological change the sacrament confers, and this is that's kind of ambiguous earlier on. It begins to solidify in the later Middle Ages, and as a matter of law, which does have theological significance, it is a common priest like Luther would not have had faculties to do that, regardless of kind of the metaphysical questions at issue. Now, more to the point, and a better analogy is that Anglican priests, Anglican bishops that had been ordained in the traditional rite definitely had the power to ordain priests, and they validly ordained priests. But after the introduction of the Edwardine ordinal in the English Reformation, they changed the rite of ordination, which vitiated the priesthood, and subsequent bishops in the Anglican line lacked the power to validly ordain priests, and the Anglican orders were in consequence null and void. No one has ever treated Lutheran ordinations as if they were anything other than null and void.
Okay. Adam, thanks for
no one in the Catholic hierarchy
right.
has ever treated Lutheran ordinations anything other than null and void.
Adam, thanks for checking in from Minnesota. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Kevin chiming in via YouTube. Kevin says, if a person is cut off from God due to mortal sin, are they also cut off from the intercession of the saints?
No. And let's be clear what we mean by cut off from the grace of God. So if you are a Catholic, you have a right to the grace of God, like by divine condescension, right? And through the ordinary channels. And you have a kind of unrestricted right to the sacrament of reconciliation. And so, there's this famous controversy in the 11th century called the investiture controversy between Pope Hildebrand, Gregory VII, and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, who called Hildebrand a false pope and the Antichrist, and was really making a bid for ecclesiastical power. He tried to have the Pope removed from office, and so the Pope, of course, excommunicated him. And that had more political ramifications in the 11th century than it would have today. Today it might get you elected, if the Pope excommunicated you in some countries. But back then it was really a problem. It was a handicap politically. And so Henry had to reconcile with the Pope. And that happened a couple times. And there's this famous episode where, Henry gets excommunicated, and the Pope is pretty hacked off at him. And I think they were in Canossa. And Henry knows, I got to make a show of this thing because I'm going to lose the barons and the dukes, and I'm going to lose my political standing if I don't get reinstated. And so he goes and stands out in the snow outside the Pope's castle. And the Pope is a priest.
Yes.
And he's sitting there, he's like, I don't want to absolve this, but he can't. He can't not do it. And so because Henry's out there doing penance, the Pope is forced, as it were, to go out and absolve Henry, whereupon Henry goes and raises an army and tries to go to war with the Pope, and it's all, starts all over again, right? But the point of the story was that as a Catholic, Henry had a kind of absolute right to the sacrament of penance, provided he was penitent, provided he showed signs of penance. You can't refuse the sacrament. And so, we may not have the grace of God active in your soul if you're in mortal sin, which you don't. But to say cut off, you got to recognize that you always have a right to come back, right? No one is cast off permanently unless they cast themselves off permanently, right? But as far as the intercessions of the saints is concerned, like, no. Like, if you were cut off from intercession, then you would never pray for sinners. The Catholic Church just prays all the time for sinners, prays constantly for the reconciliation of the world and for the repentance of sin. And, and especially those, St. Faustina taught us, especially those in need of God's mercy. Right? Especially those in need of God's mercy.
Yep, that's right.
That was the Fatima prayer. Sorry, not Faustina.
You were close.
Right, yeah.
Kevin, thanks so much for checking in on YouTube this afternoon. And here's a great question from Wendy, and this does come up from time to time. Wendy says, is it okay for Catholics to get a tattoo? My son wants to get one. Would appreciate your advice. Thanks, Wendy.
Yes, nothing in canon law on tattoos. Nothing in canon law on tattoos. So I know priests that have tattoos. I know one who has a giant Our Lady of Guadalupe all over his chest that he got in the Marine Corps, or soon to be priest, I should say. Nothing in canon law that forbids tattoos. So I think at this point that it is a question of prudence as to whether you think it is a prudent idea to have a tattoo. Personally, my own personal opinion is that is a contextual question. So, and let's take the question of the priesthood, for example. Let's say you're a priest, or you're going to be a priest, and you are going to serve in a particular population, a demographic. You would be wise to consider how the presence or absence of a particular tattoo might affect the reception of your ministry. You might find that in a particular culture, it is a requirement almost to be socially accepted to have a certain kind of tattoo. You might find that in another social context, it is mandatory that you have no tattoos. And it really is going, St. Paul said, I want to be all things to all people. To the Jew, I'll be like a Jew. To the Gentile, I'll be like a Gentile. To the untattooed, I will be like the untattooed. To the tattooed, I will be like the tattooed. Right? Is it prudent? That would be my judgment. That would be my question to you.
All right. And thanks so much for your email. Probably close with this one from Jane. My husband and I are doing Bible in a year. We just read the story of Hanukkah in the book of Maccabees. So if deuterocanonical books are not included in the Protestant Bible, how do Protestants explain the celebration of Hanukkah, especially if they believe in sola scriptura?
Protestants don't celebrate Hanukkah. Jews celebrate Hanukkah.
Well, but how do they explain the celebration of Hanukkah?
They recognize that Jews have this in their sacred history. They just think the Jews are wrong. Like they don't necessarily just because a text isn't canonical doesn't mean it's not a historical source. I mean, that's like asking, how do I explain, Theravada Buddhist practice? Well, with reference to the Theravada Buddhist scriptures that I don't believe in. Like how do I explain, Hindu ritual relative to the Mahabharata? Well, they read the Mahabharata. I don't. I'm not sure I see the point. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So Jewish history harkens back to this period of apocryphal history. Protestant history doesn't. There you go.
All in how you look at it. And Jane, thanks so much for your email today. Got a lot of emails in, got a lot of phone calls in, some texts, and some YouTube folks. Glad to get all that in on this edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
We do this program on EWTN Radio 5 days a week at 2 p.m. Eastern. Check out the podcast anytime you wish by going to EWTN.com. and then click on the radio box. And then once you're there, look for the words Podcast Central, now with about 100 podcasts, not only from programs that we produce, like this one, but also from some of our partners all over the world. I think you'll really enjoy everything that you find on EWTN's Podcast Central. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Hey, thanks for joining us. See you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Have a great day, and God bless.